Can people in Zoom hear me okay? Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Nadezhda. Fantastic, fantastic, wonderful. Okay, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone to this meeting of the Brussels Energy Club. And I'm very pleased to say it's a tremendous pleasure for me that we're actually back meeting with you in person, although it's a slightly new world, a brave new world, the hybrid world. So we have about 35, 40 people joining in Zoom. And they can hear us perfectly when we speak into the microphone, and we will be able to hear them as well. So it's fantastic that we are able to meet in person, of course. Now, for people, there's some new people here I see. So my name is Marat Tartarev. I guess I founded the Brussels Energy Club some nearly 10 years ago. It's essentially a discussion club format, sort of here in Brussels. And we're very happy to be cooperating actually with the Brussels Press Club, who have this wonderful IT infrastructure in order to allow us to, have this meeting here today. Now, just I know there's a lot of people here, particularly in Zoom, from our advisory board. Our director, Nadezhda Kokotovich, is also joining us in Zoom and not being able to be, unfortunately, with us here in person in Brussels. So for our friends from Brussels Energy Club, our members as well, of course, I would just like to make two very tiny comments. One, a sad message, and that is the passing of our advisory board member, Joe Paritsky, the former energy minister of Israel, sadly passed away. So I have sent commiserations to his family from all of us in Tel Aviv. And there's, of course, an obituary on the website of the club. So please feel free to read. He was a great man and came many times to Brussels. Also would like to send you a very cheerful message, and that's the birthday, and I won't say which one, of our advisory board member, Christian Clertings. So Uncle Chris, from all of us, a very, very happy birthday to you. Some of your colleagues here are from the European Commission, who you know very well, as well as many of your friends and new friends. So very, very happy birthday to you. Now, in terms of today, everyone, I think we're going to have a really interesting session. We're very privileged to have, the CEO of Naftogaz Ukraine with us here today, Yuri Vitrenko. Now, you all, of course, know that Ukraine is very dear to my heart. As a, Odessan Australian, I've been following the last 20 years or so in quite some detail developments in Ukraine on the political front, on the energy front, of course, as well as wider geopolitical issues. So for me, it's a real fantastic pleasure that someone of Yuri Vitrenko's stature has actually been able to find the time in his busy schedule, sort of moving around London and Brussels here, raising awareness about, Ukraine's energy security concerns and, many of the challenges that it, as well as Europe, is currently facing. So we're going to have a really, I think, a fascinating sort of discussion with Yuri. Now, I just wanted to say also that this meeting, in principle, our meetings at the Brussels Energy Club are off the record. Many of you have been to our fantastic villa where we have a very intimate environment. We have very frank and open discussions on a lot of quite sensitive issues to do with industry sort of issues. But I think today I'd like to invite Yuri to kind of continue with this Chatham House spirit. I think yesterday you spoke on the record, and I was very impressed. I actually watched the video recording of your interventions yesterday. So I was very impressed with your frankness, your openness, and courage in many ways to address, awesome issues, these massive gas pipeline projects and, that Moscow is bringing online and the challenges that has for Ukrainian energy security. So if any journalists would like to pick up any of the comments, if they've joined on Zoom or here, I would ask you just as a courtesy, if possible, just run by us what you want to publish sort of before. And, you know, it's a complex subject matter, and, you know, Brussels is a fantastic press corps, but sometimes because of the complexity of the issues, it's good to just get some clarifications. So if you would like to do that. Now, just before we move on to Yuri's initial sort of intervention, I do just want to say that I feel Ukraine is at a very critical juncture at the moment. In terms of its energy, in terms of its politics, the challenges for Ukraine in terms of turning around some of its geopolitical, let's say, kind of challenges from Russia are enormous. The challenges for Ukraine of also, let's say, getting right some of its internal energy governance sort of issues are also quite substantial. However, the potential remains. You know, Ukraine remains a potentially massive contributor to European energy supplies. A lot of that upstream potential is not yet realized, and I hope we'll hear from you about some of that. Gas transit is an issue, of course, of some questions, whether it will remain beyond the 2024 sort of period. That is yet to be seen. And of course, you know, many issues to do with internal reform of the energy market, you know, bringing it in line, you know, with the European internal energy market requirements, as well as obligations under the Energy Community Treaty. So to hear all this from someone like Yuri Vitrenko, I think is very important for us. Because he really is, I've had a good look at his bio, an architect of some of these reforms, and you know, a protagonist that has been pushing through, let's say, some of these issues at a kind of mid to upper management level, yeah, which is really where it happens, because, you know, political figures come and go in many countries, in some they stay longer maybe, but you know, in that middle tier bureaucracy sort of link between the politics and the economics, sometimes it's very difficult to separate those. So to push through reforms in Ukraine, you know, is no mean feat in reality. So I think, you know, we're very privileged to have someone like Yuri, and I think Yuri's relevance to the Ukrainian reform process is very fresh, because in your biography, I see a very strong combination of financial, particularly on the investment banking side, experience, as well as the energy experience. And at the end of the day, if you don't get your finances right, and if you don't get your capital flows and capital markets, you're not going to get really a buoyant and, you know, as you said at Chatham House, a normal sort of gas market. So I think, you know, you're very well placed to activate some of these reforms. You have already been acting energy minister of Ukraine for, you know, a brief but important stint. So I think, you know, I often talk a bit too much, but that's me. So I'm going to hand over to you, Yuri, now, and invite you for an initial intervention. And maybe if, you know, you can, of course, say what you like. I'm sure you've prepared some notes, but maybe we can also pick up just on one or two of the points that I thought were not completed in the Chatham House discussion yesterday. And that was, you know, this really interesting point that you and Simon Pirani sort of debated, I guess, to some degree. And your view was that, you know, we need the gas transit to remain, because gas transit is, in essence, something that prevents an escalation of all out military hostilities by Russia against Ukraine. That was a message that I seemed to receive from you, whereas Simon's view was that, you know, this is a vital source of income for Ukraine, of course, from transit royalties. So I'd be interested in you maybe elaborating a little bit on that, whether you agree to some extent with Simon, and also whether you would agree with his perspective that, you know, Russia looks at the gas business from the logic, yes, of politics, but also the logic of economics. so commercial motivations, because at the end of the day, when Russia stopped supplying gas to you, it arguably lost its biggest gas market by BCM terms. So maybe with those couple of questions, you can start us off, as well as adding your points, and then we'll go through. And I will bring people into the discussion throughout, both in the room and in Zoom. So Yuri, you're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marat, for a very good introduction and some good words again about me personally. But generally, or maybe I would start with just saying that it's an honor for me to be here in front of policymakers, diplomats, businessmen, people who know the energy sector. Probably it's a good end of busy working day when you talk to real professionals. So I do believe that our discussion tonight will be really up to the point and will be pleasant, professionally wise, for all of us. Again, few words about Naftogaz. Naftogaz, it's the national company. We are the largest company in Ukraine. We produce, we provide storage services. We are in distribution of gas, supply of gas. We ensure security of supply to Ukrainians. We organize transit of Russian gas through Ukraine. So we are all over the gas sector, and not just the gas sector, but also oil. And because Ukraine is also in the middle, actually at the start, at the beginning of the energy transition, we are now not just oil and gas company, we're an energy company. We invest in renewables, solar. We are working on green hydrogen, currently in the form of green ammonia and green toluene. But again, we have some concrete plans how to facilitate this transition. The next big thing for us, we believe, is biogas. We believe that Ukraine has a great potential for biogas. And we generally say that we're a gas company, not a natural gas company. And since hydrogen and biogas, it's also gas, again, that's something that naturally we should be doing. And yes, Ukraine plays and used to play and continues to play a pivotal role in the European energy sector because historically and still big volumes of Russian gas go through Ukraine. We have the largest underground gas storages in Europe. Now we're one of the largest buyers in the European market. So from that perspective, the role of Ukraine is very important for the European Union. And then probably I will go straight to your question, because I believe I will have a chance to talk about all the other issues. And it would be probably better if we do it in an interactive kind of mode instead of me just delivering a speech. I'm pretty much sure that you will ask the right questions, and how I will have a chance to say basically what I want to say. But back to your question. Frankly, I can't see a huge controversy about the Steinman's position as you described it and my position, because on one hand, of course, there is a higher risk of a full-scale war if there are no flows of gas through Ukraine. On the other hand, yes, it is an important source of revenue for Ukraine. It's about $2 billion. And we can look from different perspectives how we spend this money. On one hand, Ukraine spends around $2 billion, more or less the same kind of money, on, for example, subsidies to renewables, so-called green tariff. If you look at it, and you will calculate the difference between the market price and the green tariff multiplied by electricity generated by renewables, so you will end up more or less the same kind of money, $2 billion per year, every year. At the same time, again, yes, we do spend money on our defense. So we have a defense budget that is bigger than $2 billion, but still, basically, if compared to the defense budget, $2 billion, it's a big part of this budget. And if we don't have this money, it means that we're weaker. And imagine what happens when Russia's neighbor is weak and Russia's neighbor has a different choice rather than the Russian world. What happens? Putin invades such a country. Again, it happened in the past. So if we're weak, it's just an invitation for Putin to invade Ukraine. So that is why there is no, again, controversy around us not willing to be weak, so that Putin can, again, wage a full-scale war against us. And probably, again, it's in the interest of the free world to make Ukraine strong, so that Ukraine can defend itself and to some extent, or to a large extent, defend the free world, because many countries in this so-called free world do not want to go to war with Putin. So probably they would prefer Ukraine to be at the forefront and to fight this war instead of them. How cynical it may sound, but that's the case. So that is why, again, yes, it is important for Ukraine to be strong. To be strong, we need to be careful about the revenue sources that we have. Otherwise, again, the chance of a full-scale war again is very, very high. And by the way, if we look at 2014, when Putin invaded Ukraine, to a large extent, it was because Ukraine was weak. And Ukraine could not defend itself effectively. And why Ukraine was weak? Because right before that, the previous contractual relationship de facto resulted in a situation when, on average, Ukraine paid $5 billion more for the Russian gas it imported compared to transit revenues it got from Russia. $5 billion every year. It's roughly like 5% of the GDP at that time. From Ukraine to Russia. Ukraine got weaker, Russia got stronger. Russia invaded Ukraine. So if you cannot see a logical link over there, again, then maybe we have a different logic. What we changed in 2014 and 2015 was exactly that. So after the changes that we made, Ukraine started to pay less for the imported gas that it got for transit. Of course, Russia didn't like it. So we went to arbitration, and then the arbitral tribunal in Stockholm decided that we were right and Russia was wrong, and made them pay even more. So they had to pay us $3 billion more, and we enforced this payment, again, making Ukraine stronger and being able to defend itself.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's just take a few minutes to carry on this discussion if we can, and then we'll bring in people. I know there's a lot of spare capacity, you can say, Alan, you know, in the room in terms of additional volumes of substance that can actually come into the discussion. So we like to have a little bit of humor here at the club so people can actually enjoy themselves apart from just obtain knowledge and exchange information. But I just want to follow up on that a little bit. And yeah, clearly I have some sympathy for you and for my Ukrainian brothers, of course, you know, because it is a case of, you know, the bear and the wolf in a sense, you know, this Russia-Ukraine relationship. But I do want to say it's nothing abnormal.
Bear and hair, nice looking hair.
A bear and a hair. That's
yes,
that's a more important one actually in this one. But I think the bear and the wolf is the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, you know, Russia and Turkey in the historical context.
In the middle between the bear and the wolf. You see, that's.
Well, I was in the middle at Yesa, actually.
A part of Ukraine.
You know, but well, then I had to leave for Australia. But, okay. But I, in all seriousness, I do want to say that it's not abnormal for, you know, countries that are neighbors to each other to have, you know, kind of difficult relations. I was just in Morocco actually about a week ago, coming back from West Africa, and I just remind myself of the Algerian-Moroccan relationship, and you know, Morocco quite often threatening to, you know, kind of cut off transit of Algerian gas to Spain. And, you know, Germans and Austrians have a very specific relationship, but we won't get into that. But what I did want to actually follow up on was a point you made yesterday at Chatham House, for which I do have some sympathy. And that was the following, that because of the Russian, you know, military buildup and this kind of what my colleague George Nicolescu in the audience from the European Geopolitical Forum would refer to these frozen conflicts this kind of Russian policy of, advancing these frozen conflicts in various parts of the former Soviet Union, which tends to, kind of keep tension in a state of ongoing suspension. And you kind of messaged that this deters, if not dissuades, foreign investment coming into Ukraine, because of course, if there is an imminent threat of hostility, and if that threat is perpetuated, markets don't go to where there is political instability. Money, capital flight is very well known. So your kind of message that I received was that, because of this ongoing threat, Ukraine's potential in attracting FDI, you mentioned some of these IOCs or foreign partners that were doing some seismic research, in the Black Sea and other regions, they would be put off from going into Ukraine. But then Jonathan Stern came into the discussion, you'll remember, and he raised the question of governance. And, governance is a very difficult issue. And, it's not perfect in the EU, it's not perfect in Ukraine. And, there's a lot of cases against European governments under the Energy Charter Treaty, as we know, for changing the rules on incentive schemes on solar energy projects. But the question here is, what is more at play here? I mean, the Ukrainian gas sector has not had the best reputation, let's say, from my institutional memory of the last 20 years. I'm not going to go into that in depth. I do feel that there are very honest efforts going on in Ukraine. I know some of the people personally that have been trying to reform the sector, trying to clean up. You're one of them, by the way. So I think, it's very important to keep that going. You have a lot of support from various partners, of course, internationally. So what would you say is really putting off investment into Ukraine's energy sector, gas industry, foreign investment? I mean, is it this, Russian military buildup, this continued tension, or is it more the fact that we have still not managed to get this governance question right? And I do want to remind people that Ukraine has attracted a lot of FDI. Ukraine has attracted a lot of FDI in multiple sectors of the economy, in banking, in telecoms, in many sort of sectors. And investors in those sectors have not, rejected Ukraine. They have come to Ukraine. So they have not seemed to be deterred by this military threat. So please, Yuri.
It's a tricky question, frankly, because if you look, for example, at the situation before 2014, because before the invasion and illegal annexation of Crimea, you would see companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron investing in Ukraine and having some grand plans over there, despite the fact that we had Yanukovych, despite the fact that we blatantly ignored, again, the European rules and stuff like that. So, and also, if you look at the history of the oil and gas industry and many oil majors, you cannot see that in this industry, again, governance comes first. So probably, again, energy is like big money, and there are specific rules of the game. That's something that we want to change, by the way, in our industry. And that's something that we are changing. And even currently, for example, in London, we're also talking to some partners and investors. Currently, ESG is really high on the agenda. So energy companies do understand that they need to transform because all days are over. But in 2014, let's say we still had these old days. At the same time, of course, again, it's not our choice that Russia invades us, but it's, again, it's an unfortunate fact. And to not even to compensate, but again, what can we do in such a situation? Then again, we need to be even more open for investments. We need to improve governance, maybe secondary factors, but again, given the situation, we have to do everything possible to develop Ukraine and to attract foreign investors. That is why we started these reforms in 2014 with a very clear objective to attract investments. And on many fronts, we were successful. So, for example, although Naftogaz was a monopoly, we opened the wholesale market. So we integrated it into the European market with some help of the European institutions, but frankly, with all due respect to our international partners, for example, we provided a non-discriminatory access to the market, again, non-discriminatory third-party access to our pipelines even before we unbundled. So again, for example, unbundling was like a fetish, even I would say, because it's off the record. So for many European policymakers, but even before, basically, again, we provided what is intended to be a consequence of unbundling, again, a non-discriminatory third-party access to the market. So all the companies could import gas into Ukraine, trade gas in the Ukrainian market. There were absolutely no preferences for Naftogaz. And that's why, as a result of it, our market share in the wholesale segment, non-regulated segment, decreased to like 3% or something like that. So we deliberately did it because we wanted to invest, to develop the market. And many international players came and they're still happy. So again, nothing bad happened to them. They earned their money. Again, they were a part of this market. By the way, unlike in many other Eastern European countries. So if you read even some reports by Acer, NSOG, and other respected European institutions, you will see that in many rankings, Ukrainian market is above some Eastern European markets. And then even recently, for example, we had the supervisory board at Naftogaz, and the government fired the previous CEO and the previous supervisory board. First of all, there were some obvious failings, like, for example, Naftogaz became again loss-making. It was a big setback after years of all these reforms resulting in Naftogaz becoming profitable. And then again, Naftogaz was loss-making in 2020. Naftogaz was loss-making in the first quarter of 2021, even despite the increase in prices, and Naftogaz produces gas. So it was kind of an obvious decision. At the same time, one of the other major failings was that although we had this international supervisory board with a majority of international independent supervisory board members, they did not help Naftogaz to attract foreign investments. And that's, of course, something that is not acceptable. So the reason why we do, for example, these reforms is because we want foreign investors to come. We want them, again, to put their their money where their mouth is. We want, again, them to bring know-hows, again, technologies, and again, the money, so that we can develop the sector. That is why, for example, now Naftogaz, it's the government, but Naftogaz is supporting it, and it's again, facilitating the process of finally an open, competitive, and merit-based procedure to select the new supervisory board members. By the way, the previous supervisory board was selected without such a procedure. No, there was no competitive and merit-based procedure. Maybe that was the problem. So this time, finally, it would be different. By the way, I advertise to participate in this process. It's still not a deadline. So again, here there are energy professionals. So please, if you are interested, please apply. And we are interested in having experienced professionals, businessmen, diplomats, politicians who have, not acting politicians, but former politicians who have interest and who think that they can help Naftogaz and they are interested in becoming supervisory board members. Please participate in this process. And through, again, supervisory boards, through some other measures like this, we want to improve corporate governance. In addition to improving the governance at the policy level.
Yuri, thanks for being so open, and also an invitation to everyone too, for people in Zoom to, you know, if they want a career adjustment perhaps, and you know, Ukraine is a fantastic country and a beautiful place to live and work, I think, from personal experience. But I just want to ask you, because you know, my brain is maybe divided into two halves. There's the Odessan side of my brain, Одесская страна, and then there's the Australian kind of westernized, if you like, side, Австралийская страна. Две большие разницы, они воюют постоянно. They're in conflict, you know. So I just want to say to you that the Odessan side of my brain has a feel for, if not an understanding of why Naftogaz was loss-making, let's say in the 90s and 2000s, particularly maybe even after this January 2009 Timoshenko-Putin agreement, which we understand was not favorable for Ukraine. The Australian side of my personality or brain understands that Ukraine has been a member, I can't remember which year you ratified the energy community, but I think you've been a member for, Torsten will tell me, at least eight years, 10 years. Thanks. So, I mean, you know, reform for us is not a new topic when it comes to Ukraine. So the Australian side of my personality, and, you know, the Andrei Kobolevs of this world, these are very intelligent people and very good professionals. You know, I can say that often on the record. But what the Australian side of my brain does not understand why Naftogaz has been loss-making in more recent years, because we think, and probably Europeans think, that you have been moving in the right direction. It maybe has been slow to some degree. And, you know, we understand there's oligarchs and things going on and Kolomoiskis and all kinds of people, you know, but can you maybe help my two sides of my brain understand why Naftogaz has been more loss-making in recent years? Can you also update us on the current situation? You're, you know, you're an investment banker, so I think your financial acumen is pretty strong. Can you maybe elaborate, please?
Yes. You're not basically unique in terms of being confused about the financial performance of Naftogaz. But let's look, for example, at 2019. That's the year of record profits of Naftogaz. So on one hand, again, Naftogaz is super profitable. Everybody praises Naftogaz for being profitable and for all the wonderful reforms. Everybody takes credit for that. There was an old Soviet joke that if you look remember there was a picture basically of people helping Lenin to carry some log. And then the joke was that if you calculate the number of people who claimed that they helped Lenin to carry this log, it will be much, much longer than the length of any possible log. So again, on one hand, it's good basically when people take credit for something they do. It's worse than when they claim credit for something they don't do. But again, so let's leave it aside. Again, Naftogaz was profitable and everything seemed again very positive. But if you look a little bit deeper, you will see that one business unit of Naftogaz, and Naftogaz has many business units, had profits that were larger than the total profit of Naftogaz. It means that the rest of Naftogaz was indeed loss-making. This only business unit was the transit business unit. And I'm not praising myself, but I was in charge of this business unit, basically. And there was no surprise why this business unit was so successful in 2019, because first of all, transit was a cash cow for Naftogaz. Gas transit, again, Russian gas transit through Ukraine. But also in 2019, we got money from Gazprom, $3 billion at the very end of the year. So we recognize his profits, and that's why we were super profitable. But the rest of Naftogaz, again, was loss-making even in 2019. Why? Because some of the reforms were cargo cults. Some of the reforms were more like Potemkin villages. And when you, for example, look at gas production, again, it was decreasing. There were no international partners except for some small, with some small exception. Again, and we spent years basically to persuade this poor guy to partner with Naftogaz and to invest at least something. The guy was from INSEAD, that's my business school, so we had to ski together, and I need to explain to him again in long hours basically why it's a good thing basically to invest in Ukraine. But again, it's rather an exception that proves the rule. Also, if you look at other sides of the business, again, I, for example, personally, and we had this personal debate with my predecessor, Andrei Kobolev, that we need to do more. And sometimes, of course, again, the whole industry is developing. So to some extent, it's like a Red Queen effect from Lewis Carroll. So you need to, if you just do nothing, basically, then you are going backwards. So you need to move fast, even if you want to be in the same position. But if we want to catch up, we need to do much, much more. And frankly, also, maybe because I studied in the West, I worked in the West, I see how obsolete we are in Ukraine on many dimensions. And frankly, sometimes it seems that we cannot just catch up on our own. So we need international partners just because otherwise it's not possible. Also, Frank, and there are energy professionals in this room. So we're not Saudi Arabia. So we don't have such reserves that would make a difference on a global scale. We're not Norway with their huge Norwegian continental shelf. So that is why we cannot develop some kind of, we lack scale to develop some kind of unique capabilities at the global scale. That's why I think it's more than reasonable for us to have a strategy where we as a national company is just a platform for international partnerships, so that international companies who need some kind of local partner can be more comfortable in Ukraine with us, investing in Ukraine, doing their business together with us. That's in a nutshell, at least an important ingredient to the success, so that Naftogaz, again, is different and is profitable. About the recent changes, so I was appointed in late April. As I have mentioned, the first quarter was loss-making at Naftogaz. Second quarter was already profitable. But the third quarter probably again be a little bit loss-making. So we decreased our losses 4 times. But because we want to be open and honest, and we are recognizing all the possible losses, we are making all the possible provisions, basically, just to show how transparent and honest we are. We're also honest with our government. We're showing all the problems with the sustainability of the value chain. We're showing that, for example, many of our customers cannot afford to pay because they're, for example, energy inefficient. And for example, the heating sector, it's the biggest problem in Ukraine. So we have to recognize to the maximum extent a provision for bad debts from this sector, because we don't want to imitate reforms. We want to put them into all the problems into a spotlight, so that together we can solve these problems, because we are not in the business of these Potemkin villages, you see. So we want some real change to happen. And we want some, again, the real results out of it. Okay. And last year and next year, again, even the fourth quarter, and I still believe that at the end of the year, or if we look at the year as a whole, we will be profitable even for 2021 and for 2022.
I'm going to broaden it and bring in people. I've got a lot of questions coming in the chat, and so Jan and Jean de Brabander, I fully note your questions, and we will come in on those. But just to develop it just a tad longer, I'm optimistic about what I'm hearing from you, and I think I think I find convincing, let's say. But what I do want to ask you is, what sort of company is Naftogaz becoming? I mean, I still associate you as predominantly a kind of a transport infrastructure, yeah, like running the very, very extensive. I think you have 39,000 kilometers worth of pipelines or something like this. One of the most advanced. I think Iran maybe has slightly more, but in terms of length, but an amazingly developed resource infrastructure. The Ukrainian gas pipeline network. However, we have had in Brussels Energy Club, maybe some of you were actually present, a discussion on Ukraine's upstream potential, on independent oil and gas companies, of which there are a few. Some of them have had difficult experiences, I would say. JKX Oil and Gas is an example. But with your leadership and your hopefully going to be around for a while, at the head of the company. But do you see profits coming in more from upstream sort of development, or is that going to be suspended because it's still the problem with Russia and other issues? Do you see transit, well, certainly up until 2024, as still a major source of income? You said the transit division of Naftogaz was really bringing in the money in the past. Or do you see the company diversifying? You did say, and I think strategically a great point, that the company will start to have some green investments and sustainable investments, and that's where the money's coming from. At the end of the day, it's IFIs and the private sector is reducing the amount of money for fossil fuel sort of projects. So what sort of company is Naftogaz going to become in the next few years? And where is the revenue going to come from? And how is that going to affect also the position of some independent energy producers in Ukraine who have had an uneasy time, I would say?
In the next couple of years, our, again, obligation, I would say, our duty as a national company is to be a driver of a sustainability of the entire value chain, because it's not there. And we can dream about fancy stuff, but unless there are some fundamentals over there, like, for example, financial sustainability of the value chain, again, they're all just pipe dreams. But if we look at the longer term perspective, then what I would like Naftogaz to be, it's less of an infrastructure company, less of a resource company, but more of a tech company. Because that's exactly what we lack. For example, again, Ukraine used to produce a lot of oil and gas in the past. So we produced 4 times more gas than currently, and we produce 3 times more oil than we produce at the moment. Again, with old technologies, we considered many fields as depleted. We considered many provinces and as not interesting enough. With modern technologies, we can produce oil from depleted fields. We can, again, produce much more from existing provinces in terms of natural gas and condensate. So it's just a matter of proper technology. To some extent, we're inspired by the US shale revolution, where people thought that, okay, so production in the US was declining, and people thought like, okay, for ages, the US will be the major importer of oil and gas. And with modern technologies, the US became one of the major exporters of natural gas and oil. So we are inspired by this use of technology. We also see transformations across the sectors. For example, in the finance industry, as you mentioned, again, I'm a former investment banker. And currently, if you go to London, I meet with my buddies, again, from bulge brackets investment banks. They're all talking about fintech. So more and more, many industries, it's about, again, becoming a technology company rather than anything else. So that is why long-term, I think that's the destiny of Naftogaz as a national company, to be a platform, or there's a more modern word for that, an ecosystem, basically, for technology developments in the energy sector.
I think you'll win a lot of friends in Brussels, actually, with kind of a vision like that in terms of tech and, moving towards sustainability. But I did actually want to build on that very slightly, and then I'm going to open the floor. Decarbonization, Paris, climate, all of this sort of discussion. This in Brussels is now the elephant in the room. I remember when I first came here, I was at one of these high-level meetings, and it was, I think, on gas transit, in fact. And, we had a coffee break, and then, I said to one of my colleagues, what's the next sort of topic for the conference? And she said, oh, it's on climate. Nobody will come. Nobody came. Everyone sort of left after the gas supply disruption sort of panel. Now it's actually the reverse. Maybe you're starting a new trend, to bring the Naftogazes of this world back into the spotlight. But I mean, in all reality, does the company have a decarbonization strategy? We had a meeting in July on decarbonization strategies of the IOCs. E&I of Italy, one of our members, actually presented their decarbonization. And there was someone from ADNOC in Abu Dhabi also talking, massive oil producer, but also having a substantial portfolio in green investments. So how can you just build a little bit? You've already given us a good flavor, in fact, of the tech and this sort of stuff. But how do you see Naftogaz next 3 to 5 years contributing? How do you see Naftogaz fitting into the Green Deal type substance side of that document with the EU and, Fit for 55? This is the big discussion in Brussels. And, you are coming closer and closer to us. Please.
We are indeed very serious about the climate change and decarbonization. But for me, it's not just about some nice words and some declarations. It starts with money and it ends with money. I don't want to look too cynical, you see, and too pragmatic. But for me, again, I cannot just look at such a large-scale initiative without looking at some kind of feasibility of such a change. And feasibility, again, it's to a large extent about money. And again, through maybe such pragmatic view of the world, that's how we make the change happen. For example, in 2014, what we did in order to decrease inefficient consumption of Russian gas, it's basically we started the pricing reform. So before, prices were like 15 times lower than the market price. People were just wasting energy. Gas was just too cheap. Even again, although people were not particularly rich, but still basically gas was so cheap, they did not care about energy efficiency. As soon as we started caring about that, again, through this pricing reform, consumption of natural gas decreased 40%. And it allowed us to decrease imports of Russian gas 3 times. So that's the real thing, that's the real change. See, it's not just about talking about decarbonization, that's something that we're like doing in real life. Also, again, we are investing in renewables, as I said. As a country, we spend enormous amount of money on these green subsidies. So again, it's like from 1 to 2% of the GDP every year, even though Ukraine is not a very rich country. So if you compare to many European countries, you will see that many European countries spend much less on renewables. Also, if you see at how renewables develop in Ukraine, we're exceeding the plans and our commitments that we have in place also in front of the European community. Also, as Naftogaz, for example, now we are among the first and among the leaders. Basically, we are the leaders, but just because we're so big, in terms of, for example, green hydrogen agenda in Ukraine. Again, biogas. Probably here we're not the leader because historically it was kind of distributed smaller scale projects around Ukraine. But now we want to, again, be really big about biogas and biomass. And we want to drive this change from natural gas in centralized heating and in individual heating to biomass to an extent possible. So combined, it allows us to make this whole value chain sustainable, both financially and environmentally. So if it all starts with, again, energy efficiency, because Ukraine still consumes 2 times more, for example, natural gas per capita compared to our neighbors in Poland. And should we consume at the same level as in Poland, we would be able to export natural gas right now. So instead of importing it. So of course, again, before everything else, we need to focus on energy efficiency. We also have an energy efficiency unit. It's underperforming, so we need to do much better, much more. So that's one of the failings of Naftogaz that we want to address. As I mentioned, we need to focus on sustainable gases like biogas and hydrogen. We are saying that we're a gas company, not a natural gas company. So, and since biogas is a gas, hydrogen is a gas, again, that's something that we should be doing. And then again, fancier options, so like electrification. obviously, probably that's the right thing to do across the world. We do generate some electricity. We're not big. We have to be bigger, but at the same time, we have to be also realistic in terms of financial resources and time it takes to electrify such a big country as Ukraine. But of course, again, it's the future.
Very good, very good. I'm going to open it up now because Yuri, you're not seeing the message. You're actually, inspiring a lot of comments here in the Zoom. So I'm going to bring in people into the discussion. Alan, I know you're one of our great contributors, but can you hang on for a couple of minutes before I bring in other people? And I just want to give people in Zoom a chance, and then I'll bring people in here as well. Now, we have our advisory board member who possibly you met Friday last week in Kiev. Jan Heisman, are you there? I know that you've got a couple of points you wanted to raise. And then I also note Jean de Brabander, Yelena Medvedeva, Richard Wheeler in California, by the way, joining us on Zoom. And Jack Sharples, of course, Oxford guys who were you with in London yesterday. So let's start with Jan Heisman.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Marat, for giving me the word. Can you hear me?
Very well, Jan. Loud and clear, please.
Good, yeah. Well, I have a question relating to the markets. Where are they really? Our impression is that most of the market still is in the border. Very few companies from the West have actually made the last mile step to go into the domestic market, and what can be done about this. And the same in the same context, I wonder what happens to managing volatilities in the market. Typically, price volatility can be best managed by taking position in the markets to hedge physical exposures. Due to the lack of a forward market in Ukraine, this is not possible. What's the plan for having an exchange in Ukraine? This was a project that was discussed 4 years ago. What has happened to it? Are there plans to take it up again? Thank you.
Very good question. The problem is that Naftogaz it's an energy company. Again, we're not the government and we're not the European Commission. So there are some limitations in terms of what we can do. So we could open the market for international companies to come and to trade gas to use our gas transmission system. But we cannot, for example, resolve the problem with credit risks or credit ratings of Ukrainian consumers, even industrial consumers. And it's one of the largest bottlenecks in terms of international companies selling in the domestic market. Also, in terms of the retail market with households, even it's not to a large extent the problem of some kind of regulation and protection of vulnerable consumers. It's just, again, a fact that a combination of energy inefficiency, energy poverty, some problems with law enforcement and collection of debts in Ukraine is just too much to stomach for many international companies, and that's something that we want to change. And we would love to see a proper exchange. But here, we've been arguing even with our international partners, some of them are here in this room, that some of the exchanges that we have in Ukraine, they're called exchanges, but they're also cargo cults, you see. So there is an exchange supported by some international partners. I don't want to name them, but they don't have any centralized clearing. You see, they don't have any forward trading. It's like an auction house in a very primitive form that provides no basically protection, nothing, but allows to pretend that you have a market, basically, that you have an exchange. And that, of course, something that is very contrary to, again, objectives of my team at Naftogaz at the moment and my smaller team in the past. And that's something that we want to change, and that's something that we are working with Jan. And hopefully we had the discussion on Friday exactly on this topic, how to change it, how to have a proper market in Ukraine so that this elements of financial infrastructure, because we're talking about more like capital markets and again the financial infrastructure that you here in this part of the world enjoyed 500 years ago. Probably it was the first exchange in the Netherlands that to some extent changed the economic destiny of the entire region. So what we still lack something like that in Ukraine, and that's something that of course should be urgently addressed. And that's where, by the way, a very good example how energy and capital markets are intertwined.
Indeed, indeed. So let's continue. I think this interactive format with no slides is in some ways much better, I think. And the Zoom technology is beautiful. So let's continue with our Zoomers. Before I give the floor to Jean de Brabander, I'd like to offer the floor to the ladies because we have been historically a gentleman's club, but ladies are very welcome here. So please, Елена Медведева, пожалуйста, дорогая, вам слово. Well, I'm doing my best to bring in the ladies.
Maybe she should have unmute. Maybe she's on mute. No?
Hello?
Lena,
Hello?
please. Yes.
Okay, okay, thank you so much for Yuri for introductory part of your speech. I personally just noticed, and I have no question, but a small comment about another type of logic you mentioned. And this will be about investment. It is, from my point of view, it's quite logical for whatever country to have quite stability signals for external world, you know, to be attractive for investment and for investors. And again, from my point of view, it's quite unlogical and not very much productive to blame Russia endlessly in whatever happens in energy system and energy industry in Ukraine. Rather than that, I do believe that the market, energy market in Ukraine and the membership in energy community and cooperation with the European Union, it's indeed, it brings you very big potential. So I would suggest you do, you know, to be concentrated on the positive sides of common cooperation rather than on blaming each other. It would maybe be more productive in the current scenario. And also in terms of the common climate goals and sustainable agenda, I would also suggest to unite our efforts and maybe, you know, to be more face-to-face positive in this regard. So I personally quite, you know, have a positive impression from Brussels Energy Club raise this agenda in a quite open way. So I hope it will bring some good signals also for our cooperation. Thank you so much. I have no questions, just a comment from my side.
There's a short counter comment again. I have no problems in terms of face-to-face kind of cooperation and communication, despite the fact that, again, we had this arbitration against Gazprom, and I was leading this arbitration from Naftogaz side. And then again, I was leading the enforcement of this arbitral award again from Naftogaz side. At the end of the day, again, we had negotiations with Gazprom, and I was the one who signed the contract with Gazprom. So I personally negotiated with Miller face to face, and we signed the contract. So we can be very constructive when it's fair, when it's under the European rules, when it's not about again an abuse, but it's about like real cooperation. The problem is that it's rare like this. So the same applies, for example, to larger geopolitical and military problems. So again, of course, if your country is invaded and a big part of your territory is illegally annexed, it's rather difficult just to ignore it, or it's rather difficult just to focus on the positive side, especially when every day you read the news when your soldiers are basically being killed by pro-Russian separatists or Russian forces. So even though, again, in energy, we have to be very thick-skinned, Otherwise, you cannot do this business. So you cannot, for example, again, negotiate and sign contracts with Miller if you don't have a very, very, very sick skin. Maybe you have to. Well, I don't want to go with it about medicine, but at the same time, again, it's still we're humans. So I would encourage strongly Russia and other countries to stop weaponizing gas and to treat energy, as a commodity. Basically, it's something that makes people's life better. Basically, because again, energy is an agent for human development. It's something that makes the modern civilization modern. So that's why let's focus on the positive from this side, basically, and not do negative.
Absolutely, fully agree with you. I would encourage you for the same. Thank you for understanding.
And thank you both, in fact, for your constructive approaches. But let's continue, because that geopolitical topic, I think we might continue over some beers and drinks sort of later. But I want to focus still on the industry side. And I have Jean de Brabander who wants to come in. Please, Jean.
Thank you, Marat. Good evening, Mr. Vitrenko. First of all, it was quite enlightening up to now. Nevertheless, I still have a lot of questions, but I will limit myself in this way that personally I'm mainly interested in renewables and in hydrogen. And one of the questions I would have is there a legal framework already installed regarding hydrogen? And secondly, is the distribution network or the pipelines compatible for the transport of hydrogen to the West? That's one of the questions I'm having. But in a broader perspective, I'm very much intrigued by the situation in Ukraine for attracting private investors. And part of their investment is obviously funded by, for instance, the EBRD. How can you, let's say, justify a proposal towards DBRD, if I may call it that way, a proposal for investment in the current unstable situation? The question has been raised a couple of times yet, already. But still, I do not have any, let's say, workable answer to that question.
Jean, thanks for that. I'm going to take a couple of questions, and Yuri can maybe, respond collectively. So I know Jack is there, but I want to bring in Rich Wheeler from California, because Rich, we tried to organize a better time for you. I know that lunchtime is middle of your night, so you're welcome. Please come in.
Yes, good morning, good evening. My question, can you hear me?
Very well, Richard, very well.
Okay,
you have
my
an
question
American accent,
is,
by the way.
Okay, my question is related to hydrogen storage. So in regards to Ukraine's very large gas storage capacity, and specifically keeping in mind the fact that hydrogen molecules are smaller than methane molecules, are the large storage facilities in the western part of the country able to hold hydrogen as well as methane? And if yes, would you be able to provide an estimated storage capacity for hydrogen? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. A very specific question for Yuri. So Jack Sharples, Oxford Energy Institute, please welcome, and author of our Gazprom Monitor monthly. So please, Jack.
So, Yuri, first of all, thank you for your interesting comments. And also, I watched you with pleasure talking to Simon at Chatham House as well. The comment that I put in the chat actually was simply that I absolutely agree with you regarding the sustainability of the value chains, the ability of Ukrainian consumers to pay, and the issue of energy efficiency, and the fact that the most fundamental aspect here really concerning the profitability of Naftogaz is surely the differential between either the cost of domestic production or the price of imports on the one hand, and then the wholesale price of gas in Ukraine on the other hand. And that until that differential is sufficiently wide, then there will be either a lack of incentive to expand domestic production or to make imports more profitable. But actually, the question I want to ask you refers to a comment that you made just a few minutes ago with the comparison with Poland. And I think it's a really interesting comparison to the extent that Poland and Ukraine, in terms of purchases of gas directly from Gazprom and the question of transit, are almost mirror images of one another. When we consider that Naftogaz now has not purchased gas directly from Gazprom for 6 years, we just passed the 6th anniversary of that event, but you still have a long-term transit contract valid until the end of 2024, whereas conversely in Poland, the long-term contract for transit ended in May 2020, but the long-term contract for purchases is not due to expire until the end of next year. So my question to you is, what lessons maybe can Ukraine learn from Poland? And equally, what lessons can Poland learn from Ukraine about import diversification and the management of transit? And an additional question really is, to what extent do you think it's almost inevitable that from the 1st of January 2025, the situation regarding Russian transit could actually become rather more similar to what we see currently in Poland, where we don't have long-term transit contracts anymore, but we have capacity bookings on auctions that are held regularly. And maybe we simply have to accept that the flow of transit is going to fluctuate. So thank you very much.
So Yuri, why don't we take those, and then we'll have one from Klaus Berg-Schneider, our advisory board member, and then I'll bring in people from here. So some strong questions there. So please, Yuri.
Hydrogen, there were 2 questions on hydrogen. The legal framework is not there, but it's not just about Ukraine, it's also about the European Union. So we're all waiting for some new regulation in this respect, taxonomy and everything else. And here, again, it is important to bear in mind that we want to have an integrated market for hydrogen, and at least to the same extent, we have an integrated market for gas. And for example, in terms of the gas market, we're not reinventing the wheel. We were just transposing the European regulation into the Ukrainian regulation. That, by the way, makes the whole regulatory regime much more understandable and stable, again, for international investors, international companies. That's something that we would like to do with hydrogen as well. Also, again, Ukraine wants to export green hydrogen to Europe. We are the largest territory-wise country in Europe. We have a lot of potential to develop solar and wind and to produce green hydrogen out of it. At the same time, by the way, we were discussing it on my way here, Europe also needs to be, because we were discussing internally, and some of my colleagues were saying that we need to be faster to offer something to the European Union in this respect. But I was saying, but at the same time, the European Union should be also fast, basically, in terms of offering something to Ukraine, because the European Union should also realize that there is a big demand for green hydrogen inside Ukraine. We have a sizable metallurgy sector, and they need green hydrogen to produce green metals and to export green metals. It's a value-added product. We have a sizable agricultural sector. They need basically green fertilizers to produce green cucumbers. They're also green. They're always green, or often green, but in this particular sense, they will be green because there will be no CO2 emissions associated with their production. Again, it should be a win-win situation. Both sides should be fast in terms of implementing a new and favorable legislation to develop this kind of integrated market. In terms of hydrogen storage and, again, transmission, also, it's a tricky question because, for example, we signed some MAUs with some companies, and even inside this company, they're still debating if it should be a blend or a pure hydrogen, for example, transported through pipelines. We are lucky to have many pipes on major interconnection points between Ukraine and Europe. So we're joking that we can even experiment. We can do both. So we can do like one pipe of pure hydrogen and then one pipe for blend. But again, at the same time, Europe has to decide what kind of infrastructure they want to develop so that we have an efficient integrated market. because both options are possible. And the same applies to storage. So we can store a blend in our storages, or we can store pure hydrogen. In both cases, some modernization, some investments will be required. But again, if we are serious about developing a so-called hydrogen economy, we are talking about big amount of money anyway. So these investments are not like the most important or the biggest ones. Basically, it's not a showstopper. So yes, we need to modernize infrastructure anyway, and to make it future-proof. Again, it should be able to transport and to store hydrogen. In terms of capacity, currently we have the largest storage in Europe. It's about 30 billion cubic meters of gas. How much hydrogen can be stored there, again, depends if it's a blend of pure hydrogen. Then it also depends how compressed is that, because hydrogen is much less dense than, for example, methane. So you can basically compress it, and then again, it's just a matter how much you compress hydrogen. And then again, there should be some kind of integration between the storage operators and different transmission system operators in terms of what kind of pressure we want to have in the system. So both sides have to agree. It's not a unilateral decision. So usually TSOs agrees along the way, basically about the pressure, how to optimize the pressure in the entire integrated system. But we're talking about rather big volumes of hydrogen that can be stored in Ukraine. Also, again, if we need some kind of fast storage salt caverns, we have, again, very sizable salt production in Ukraine. Historically, we have salt caverns that can be converted for such a storage. It's just a matter of economics. But currently, at the same time, again, we're discussing about such kind of fancy options, but the most realistic options at the moment is to transport hydrogen either in the form of ammonia. We can do it overnight, by the way. We are doing it actually, basically, but we are talking about green ammonia. So we can produce ammonia out of green hydrogen and it becomes green ammonia, and it can be transported tomorrow, and we have equipment to produce green ammonia right now, basically, in Ukraine, again, the big volumes. Or, for example, another option that we're working on is just to transport green hydrogen in the form of toluene. It's basically a liquid that can be transported using the existing infrastructure, because that's something that can be done right now. Everything else, again, using the gas transmission system or the distribution system to transport hydrogen, it has to be tested, it has to be certified. It's a more distant future, I would say, realistically. Then there was a question about a proposal for EBRD. Again, we used to work with EBRD even at Naftogaz level. We have even a current project with EBRD. EBRD invests a lot in renewables in Ukraine. So it seems to me that it's not a big problem for EBRD to find, again, some projects in Ukraine. Yes, there are some problems with, for example, these investments in renewables, but the underlying problem is the same, is the financial sustainability of the entire value chain. And that's something that should be addressed, because, for example, when, as I said, Ukraine pays $2 billion, like up to 2% of the GDP in subsidies to renewable producers. Again, it's a big challenge for Ukraine, and sometimes it's difficult to do it without any delays so that everybody is happy. Then the last question about Poland. Yes, we are learning from Poland, but Poland is basically learning from us, and in this particular case, they did learn basically from us when it comes to arbitration against Gazprom and negotiation against Gazprom. Nobody could believe in 2014 when the arbitration started that we would be successful with countering Gazprom's claims and with our claims, because this ship-or-pay, take-or-pay was black and white in the contract, and everybody believed that Gazprom would be successful in claiming tens of billions of dollars from us. In total, it was about $100 billion, like almost the size of the Iranian GDP, if you look at the end of the contract. At the same time, we were claiming some compensation for so-called under-deliveries, and there was no ship-or-pay clause in the contract. one should not confuse under deliveries claim with shipper pay claim. But again, nobody could believe that we could make Gazprom pay more for transit. We did it. Again, many industry players, including PGNiG, the Polish company, again, talked to us and learned from us, and we even worked together basically, so that we also have some very valuable experience to share, and not just in the Eastern European region, but in Europe as a whole.
And that's indeed how it should be in terms of sharing experience. So we're just going to come to people in the room in just one moment. So I see Klaus Bergschneider, and I also see Sergio Mattalucci had a question. So I'll take those two, and then we'll give people in the room time to intervene, and then come back to people in Zoom. So Klaus, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yuri, for your presentation and your honest views. I think more or less it's really traceable what you said, and you mentioned later that one should take the energy topic separately. One should segregate between energy and policy. But in the beginning of your presentation, you said Ukraine needs to be strong to protect against Russia, and therefore it needs payment for the transit. In general, that's also a traceable position, but I think in the whole history of that topic, there is one point which is more or less always the same on the agenda, and that is the conjunction of policy and commercial topics. And my question is, even regarding your concerns to be attacked here, wouldn't it be better to have a really strict segregation between the political topics and the commercial topics? Because in history, you received, let's say, benefits or discounts in exchange for political actions, and when Ukraine developed its own political view, the discounts were stopped, and even other measures were taken, and now you try to play it with the other side, that you need some support from the Western part for political reasons. And I think investors always love to be in a field where they have some reliability, creditability, and where they do not rely on the volatility of political investments. And don't you put at risk your commercial chances by using that political argument?
Klaus, tricky question. Let's just take Sergio as well, and then we'll come to Yuri and people in the room.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Sergio, prego.
Can you hear me? Okay, you hear me. Good evening, Mr. Tatarov. Good evening, Mr. Vitrenko. Hydrogen is a sector that would allow Naftogaz to do two things at the same time. Can you hear me?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. Use easily deployable technologies, and I'm referring in this case to PV, so solar, and find a way to use the gas network in the future. On top of it, it will allow the country to be among the first movers also in terms of technology. In other words, it will be something quick that maintains the system in place, but most importantly, it is sustainable in the long term. what are Naftogaz hydrogen plans, and especially what are Naftogaz plans for electrolyzers? Is there any plan to size up capacity, production capacity in Ukraine? Thank you.
Sorry, Naftogaz plans for
electrolyzers.
Okay, so very different questions, by the way, but I'll start with the first one. So, of course, there should be some separation of politics and policies and commercial topics, but unfortunately, again, it's not the case right now, at least with Russia. So, and that's exactly what we want. We want to separate, to basically make Russia start treating energy as energy and as a commodity and not as a geopolitical weapon, as they have been doing for the last decades, years, months. They haven't stopped doing it. Again, some very concrete examples, by the way, in terms of that. So the reason why Russia decided to bypass Ukraine, it's not a commercial reason. So Nord Stream 2 was built after, again, Ukraine made our geopolitical choice. We're a sovereign nation. We have all the rights to decide to be with Europe rather than to be a part of the Russian world. So nobody can deprive us of this right. And then Putin said, okay, so then you will have to, you'll have to suffer, basically. So you will lose your transit revenues. Again, I will show to you what you are losing when you're not with Russia, and I will show to you that you are gaining nothing, basically, with the West. The West is rotten and corrupt. You will see it. And then he came basically to Germany. He told, again, these members of this Nord Stream 2 consortium, they're not, by the way, equity investors, they're financial investors. He suggested, look, guys, borrow me money. I will pay you 3 times more than the market rates. I'm not speculating here. Again, I'm using available information that I have basically at the moment. Maybe it's not 100% correct, but at least that's what I know and that's what I believe in. So, and then German companies, not just German, but again, the members of this consortium and some other German companies, they said, oh, yes, what a nice chance basically to get an advantage from the situation when Putin is punishing Ukraine for Ukraine's European choice. So let's make money on it. Again, if you call it commerce, maybe, but at least from a moral standpoint, and also from a standpoint of a political leadership of Germany inside the EU, it's questionable. Also, if we look at the legal side, there is a so-called solidarity principle enshrined in the treaty founding the European Union. And this principle is very clear that, for example, the German regulator should look at the effect on competition in other markets. So, I mean, Germany should take into account, again, the negative detrimental effect on competition in other EU countries. So my point is very simple again. That's exactly our position, that gas should be a commodity, should be a commercial matter rather than politics. Just a second. I'm speaking too much today, but yeah. Then history of discounts. That's a part of Russian propaganda that we proved in court that it was all wrong. So there were no discounts and favors basically in exchange for some political decisions of the previous Ukrainian government. In exchange, for example, for Black Sea fleet base, what Russia did is just they decreased the price to the market level. So basically their approach, modus operandi, was to exploit your vulnerability, to make you sign an unfavorable contract at a time when you really need, for example, their gas. And then they would come and say, look, if you want to be on par, for example, with Germany, if you want to get market terms, you should give us something in return. What we did when we went to arbitration, we said, look, no political deals, basically. We're not trading our independence. because we're already on the brink of losing our independence. We said we will prove in court that you were overcharging us. And that's exactly what we did. We won on our claims that the contract price had to be decreased to a market level. We did it. The arbitral tribunal sitting in Stockholm agreed with our position that the contract price was too high. It did not reflect the market terms. And that's why it had to be decreased. So it's really a propaganda that there were some discounts, as Putin says, and now we are in grave debt to Russia because they subsidized it. It's the opposite. And by the way, through this arbitration, we managed to at least get some compensation for overpayments. But in the past, we overpaid much more. So should we compare it to some fair market terms? I'm not even saying about some brotherhood terms, or for example, so-called Groningen formula. Many people in this room probably remember what it means. So should we have this kind of approach, the difference would be $50 billion over the life of the contract in our favor. But again, we have what we have. I'm just making this point that it's really a myth that there was some kind of preferential treatment or discounts. And that leads us to the gist of our position at the moment. It's really wrong that we are asking for some mercy, for some political help from the West. No, we're saying that, look, we want a level playing field. We want the rule of law that is, again, is a fundamental principle of the European Union to be supported and to be confirmed in case of, for example, the certification process of Nord Stream 2 operator. What it means in practical terms, it means that, again, Gazprom should treat gas as a commodity, should offer deliveries of their gas, Russian gas, on, for example, on the border between Ukraine and Russia and other borders, basically. And Gazprom should let off-takers of Russian gas decide on the transit routes. So let us compete. We will show to, again, to non-politicized market players, network users, that our system is much more reliable than Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Just because we have more pipes. So we can put one pipe on maintenance and still have 4-10 pipes that can be used for transit. Unlike, for example, with Nord Stream 1 or even Yamal Europe, when they put it on maintenance, there is no flow. We have large storages that can be used for flexibility. We can, again, we're very competitive in terms of our tariffs, but give us a chance to compete. We're not asking, again, for mercy or for help. The same applies, for example, to transit through Central Asia. Again, there are big producers in Central Asia, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They want to sell more gas in the European market. They want to sell more gas to Ukraine, or just to sell gas to Ukraine in the European Union, because currently they cannot do it at all. So again, why should not Russia just offer commercial terms? Again, no politics, just offer commercial terms to bring gas from Central Asia to Ukraine or to the European market. We have some huge abundant capacity in our system. Again, there is a huge abundant capacity to bring gas from Central Asia to the European market, but they're not doing it. Again, speaking of the commercial logic, so Gazprom is selling gas to some chemical plants in Russia, some industrial producers, private companies. Currently, like, prices are 10 times lower than in the European Union. So they're not selling more at high prices in Europe. They decrease their sales in the spot market like 3 times, basically. But they're still selling at this ridiculously low prices compared to current market prices in the Russian market. If you try to persuade me that it's a commercial logic, probably I went to the wrong business school. Okay, the last question about the plans for electrolyzers. Again, we're currently working on 2 particular projects, as I mentioned. The one is with a German company, by the way, is to produce green ammonia in Odessa. It's Odessa fertilizer plant, by the way. And there's an existing infrastructure. So they have 2, how to call it in English, basically, 2 pieces of equipment, basically, that one of them can be used for green ammonia overnight. We have in the existing infrastructure some special ships, ammonia carriers. They're called gas carriers, газовозы, although they carry ammonia, and they can go through Bosphorus, so that we can basically do it right now. We are exploring two options: offshore wind and like new projects, or existing onshore and solar projects in the Odessa region. Another project we're looking at, or it's like a pilot at the pilot stage for us, it's production of green hydrogen in Dunai river, but it's like the end of Dunai river. I don't know the English word for that. Where it's a hybrid project. It's solar and wind. Then we produce hydrogen. But just because currently it's, again, still it's undecided how to transport it through a gas transmission system, we're now experimenting with toluene as a liquid, basically, to be used as an air energy carrier. And currently we are thinking, frankly, about importing electrolyzers. We will be looking at some opportunities to produce electrolyzers in Ukraine. We're not in this business, so we're not in machinery or equipment manufacturing. But there are some developed segments in equipment manufacturing in Ukraine that probably they can also produce electrolyzers. We'll be talking to them. Of course, as a national company, we need to help Ukrainian producers to become competitive and to develop so-called local content.
Yuri, thanks. There's really a lot in that, and certainly putting a price on energy, by the way, was a publication of the Energy Charter Secretariat in 2006, which
I quoted it extensively, including in the Stockholm arbitration that we had against Gazprom.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised because
some parts by heart almost.
Thanks for that. I can get you some ceremonial copies, by the way, from the Secretariat. But I think time has come, Alan. So I think you're here, and it's time to remove the mask. You know, no more Venice Carnival. So I'm going to bring people into the room. We've got about 15, 20 minutes or so, I think. So Alan Riley, Professor Riley, please.
Thank you very much. Well, it's nice to know, Marat, that you've been so helping the Naftogaz in defeating Gazprom. It's very good to hear that.
I've been doing that? You're kidding.
In your Energy Charter Treaty work. And so what I was thinking about, and what I was particularly looking at, was the question surrounding the value of Ukraine to the European Union in energy terms. And it seems to me that the big point that Ukraine can make and Naftogaz can make is about this issue that Ukraine fundamentally provides a massive amount of energy security to the European Union. In terms of the, obviously the storage, as you mentioned, the scale of the pipeline network and its transit capacity and its ability to surge. And that surely is even more important in a period where the Nord Stream, the prospect of Nord Stream 2 is all very interesting with what the Russians are saying. But the fundamental point is that if you have a cold winter, Nord Stream 2 has no capacity for surge. If you're using a lot of wind in Europe, Nord Stream 2 has no capacity to surge, whereas the Ukrainian system has that capacity. And above all else, with Nord Stream 2 potentially in operation, surely the case is that when you actually are looking at the loss of the Ukrainian transit network, we're essentially going down from a European supply system, route system, which has got the Ukrainian transit network, Nord Stream 1 and Yamal, to a situation where you've only got two routes, the Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 route and Yamal. So you're undermining European supply security. And then the final point about the value of the system surely is this, is that if the Ukraine and the European Union can work together on suppressing the level of energy efficiency to Polish levels, then actually part of the gas crisis we've got now you could see a situation that Ukraine was actually exporting gas into Europe, helping dealing with the supply issues. So in that context, how far do you find the European member states, the European institutions, recognizing the value of the Ukrainian energy networks as an issue of importance to them as part of Europe's supply security? That's my question.
Let's have our friend Torsten here as well, because they're going to be interlinked in these points.
I have two very short questions. One question is, you have been invited to participate, Naftogaz has been invited to participate by the German energy regulator in the certification process of Nord Stream 2. How are you going to organize this? What are your expectations for the process? And the second question is, you mentioned that you would like to work with international partners. So Christmas is coming. If you have a wish, a real wish, no limitations, who would be the dream partner for Naftogaz?
Okay. Other questions maybe in the room? Yuri, maybe other questions in the room? No problem, please, Yuri.
I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful. So to some extent, I, by the way, really appreciate, I think that personally I'm blessed with being able to talk to some really interesting and prominent and good people at different levels in the EU. Again, leaders of countries like Germany, again, leaders of the European Commission, some professional at different levels. So we do feel that, again, there is some level of engagement that signals the understanding of the importance of Ukraine also to energy security of Europe. At the same time, again, I wish we would have more often more practical discussions in terms of this kind of value and how this potential can be sometimes unleashed or preserved. Because unfortunately, for example, when the Ministry of Economy and Energy of Germany issues their conclusion, the previous ministry, the previous government, maybe that's the case because they're why they're the previous government. But when they issue their conclusion on the security of supply to Germany as a result of Nord Stream 2, and they say that they cannot see any threat to the security of supply of Nord Stream 2, they fail to recognize that with Nord Stream 2 become operating, there is a very great risk that there will be no physical flows through Ukraine. So even though Gazprom honors their obligation, so-called ship pay obligation, so they pay for transit, but it's again their right not to ship, just to pay for the capacities they booked. But if there are no volumes of gas through the Ukrainian system, it will be a technical challenge for the Ukrainian system, a significant challenge. But again, at least after 2024, if Nord Stream 2 is operating, it means that most probably we won't see any transit through Ukraine. And it will be very difficult and too costly to maintain such a big system as the Ukrainian system without any predictability of transit. It was mentioned, by the way, in some of the previous questions that why don't we use experience of the Polish system when there is no long-term contract, but just there are some short-term capacity bookings. It's not really sustainable with such a system as Ukraine. We cannot maintain, 130 BCM of capacities, just hoping that maybe 1 or 2 or 3 days, basically, throughout the year, it will be used for some unspecified volume. So it just, again, it doesn't work like this. So that is why, apparently, at least some important European institutions, like, for example, the German government, fail to understand the risks coming from Nord Stream 2 in relation to Ukrainian transit, and what kind of value will be lost if there is no transit through Ukraine, and the Ukrainian gas transit system cannot provide this security of supply to Europe, and this pivotal role of Ukraine will be lost. So from that perspective, I would like to see more. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful, but I would like to see more. And in terms of international partners, here, again, I'm happily married with one wife. It was my university sweetheart, as you say, but probably in business-wise, I prefer having many partners, basically. So that's what I'm alluding to. So my favorite scenario is like not just one partner, but many partners, because having only one partner, it's in business, basically. It's exactly what that's what I started, because should I just say that it's always better to have many partners? You see, then I would have a difficult conversation with my wife back at home. So that's why there was some kind of caveat. But in business, it indeed, again, it's really important to have many partners. So that's why we want to have big, again, partnerships with European companies. And we're working on one of such partnerships, again, in green hydrogen, with one of the leading German energy company. We would like to see US companies as well as our big partners, basically. Also, we are working on, and we hope that within a year, we'll have a partnership with one big Middle Eastern company. They're not afraid of investments in oil and gas, unlike, by the way, many Western companies at the moment. Also, they have some valuable experience, so we believe that we should have partnerships with them as well. But even when it comes, for example, to gas transit, we would like to see European companies as our clients, be it Naftogaz or as an unbundled operator. We don't care. So let them choose. If they want to do it with Naftogaz, we will organize transit for them. Our competitive advantage that we can do it under the international law, and we're much more flexible in terms of contractual terms. The operator works under the Ukrainian law, and it's regulated, so rules are stricter. But it's up to companies to decide what they want to do. But at the same time, it's okay for us to continue having Gazprom as a client. So our dream scenario is when we have an extension of the current transit contract with Gazprom for, let's say, 10, 15 years. But on top of it, we have European companies and Central Asian companies as our clients for transit when they book capacities as well. That's exactly the situation we should be all working on, because it means a sustainable gas market, not just in Ukraine, but in Europe as well. It means a level playing field. It means that gas becomes a commodity. It's really like a commercial kind of sphere instead of, again, politics, geopolitics, and using gas as a weapon, as we see at the moment.
Well, the fact that you are actually clearly suggesting that you would like to have Gazprom as a client shows how constructive you are in your approach. And I hope Yelena Medvedeva also, has a good view towards that. But we have still several more questions in the Zoom in particular, and we need to finish in about 10, 15 minutes or so. So I have three people: Victor Rudenko, Joe Barnes, I believe, and Victor Rudd. So maybe I can take them in reverse order. Victor Rudd first, please, if you're there.
Yes, I am. Thank you very, very much. I am the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian American Lawyers Association. And my question is, to what extent, I'll address this to anybody who wants to take the question. To what extent has consideration been given to Russia using the path of NS2 as an excuse to bar or limit maritime traffic into waters along the pipeline, either on the strength of the excuse of safety, security, or environmental arguable issues?
Sure, thank you for that question. We will try to address it, but we may have to follow up with you on that for, I guess, a more informed source to some degree. But thank you for the question. And John Barnes was the captain of Liverpool in the 80s when I was a young guy. But Joe Barnes, I think this is. Joe, please. Aha, there you are. If you can speak in the mic, please, Joe. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah. So you've kind of spoken about the dangers of NS2 poses to your kind of operation and limiting gas supply and Russia being able to weaponize it. Angela Merkel is kind of responsible for pushing through Nord Stream 2 and making it a reality. So could you kind of speak about, have you got an expectation or a message that you'd like to send to the new German government of how you would like them to handle Nord Stream 2 and basically fulfill Europe's promise of kind of being a good ally to Ukraine when there is so much kind of Russian aggression. And you earlier were speaking about the idea of kind of Crimea. And how important is it for Olaf Scholz to kind of maybe chart a new course and do something different from what Angela Merkel has done by pushing through Nord Stream 2? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And Victor, can we also have you come in for your question, please?
Well, Marat, that's the same person.
Excuse me, sorry?
Viktor Rudenko and Viktor Rud are the same person.
Nadia, where would I be without you?
This is Victor Rudd speaking. I heard somebody refer to a Viktor Rudenko, apparently. That may be another participant in the conference. It's not me. I'm the one.
I see. Maybe I've done the invisible man trick. So Yuri, why don't you take those questions, the second one maybe and the first one as well?
Okay, my message to the new German government. I believe that it's very obvious that they should just tell Russians, tell Putin that unfortunately for him, Nord Stream 2 cannot be certified and cannot be allowed to become operating because it's not compliant with the European rules, be it the spirit of the European rules or letter of the European rules. And then Putin should decide, and they should return this kind of blackmail to him, saying that, look, you either start treating gas as a commodity, you stop playing this wars and geopolitical games, stop using gas as a weapon, or you will never see Nord Stream 2 operating. And then the new German government will explain to Putin that, again, just I'm quoting, for example, Klaus-Dieter Borchardt, a German, by the way, expert and bureaucrat in the good sense of this word, former deputy head of DG Energy in charge of the gas sector. So he was very explicit about saying that this kind of split regulation of Nord Stream 2, when only the last mile that goes on the German territory is regulated, while the rest of Nord Stream 2 is not regulated, is not subject to European rules, makes no sense. So this kind of split regulation. So he was very explicit, saying that it's the whole pipeline, the entire pipeline from Russian territory Ust-Luga to the German territory should be under the European rules. And again, it means that there should be non-discriminatory third-party access to this pipeline. It basically means that this export monopoly, pipeline export monopoly of Gazprom, should be broken up. And that's the message that the new German government should deliver to Mr. Putin. And then it means that such as undiscriminatory third-party access should be provided not just in relation to Nord Stream 2, but to all the pipelines that connect Russia and the European Union. So that's something that we would expect from the new German government, together with a very strong pushback on Putin's attempt to turn the clocks back, meaning that he wants Europe to go back to long-term contracts where Europe had no proper market, no developed market, no developed spot trading, no hubs, basically, because this kind of old good days for Putin are really contrary to the climate change agenda of the new government. Green Party is an important coalition member of the new government. They have the economy of the Ministry of Economy and Energy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that's clear that they would have a say in this process. And they should tell basically Putin that, again, in order for Europe to realize its climate agenda, they should do the opposite what Putin wants. So again, there should be a liberalized market, a level playing field, instead of again Putin and Gazprom being above the law and going back to pre-market days.
And on the maritime, I guess you don't want to comment on that because it would be a bit of a speculation, I think. Okay, I have maybe one or two questions to wrap up, but do we have anyone else in Zoom that wants to come in? Christian Klurtings, on your birthday, former architect of the EU-Russia energy dialogue with extensive experience. You're okay, Chris? No, fine. So no one else in Zoom. If anyone else would like to come in, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, very good. Any final thoughts in the room before I throw I think a final, maybe one or two to Yuri? Okay, very good. So Yuri, I want to ask you,
sorry, can I?
Lena Medvedeva. Okay, Lena, please.
Just a small question for Yuri. How would he see for himself in a best case scenario the future cooperation with Russia? Your wish list for New Year 2022.
Again, sorry for being political, but I'm Ukrainian, so that's why, again, this wish list will start with the end to illegal annexation of Crimea, and again, Ukrainian control over eastern Ukraine, the occupied territories. Because again, of course, without maintaining the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, I don't believe that we can have a stable political and economic situation in the region. And by the way, it applies to Russia. So it's my wish to Russian people that Russian people live in a democratic state, not an empire that tries to invade other independent countries, because I believe it will be better for Russian people. But business-wise, my wish list is that, again, politics is taking out of the gas sector. And by the way, as I said, again, I signed this contract with Miller. So sometimes you look into eyes of Russian gas businessmen, and you understand that they also dream about the days when politics is taking out of the gas business. Because I mean, sometimes it's not their decision to do what they do. So my wish again list includes again taking politics out of the gas business, so that again Gazprom can send more gas to Europe. Again, there are other Russian companies booking capacities of Ukrainian gas transmission system. They're very big producers of gas in Russia on top of Gazprom. Again, Rosneft, Novatek. There are some German companies producing gas in Russia. Again, some Dutch companies, British companies, American companies producing gas in Russia. So they would all probably wish to export gas to the European Union also through pipelines, not only having like LNG as the only option. Then again, as I said, Central Asian producers transiting gas through Russia. By the way, for Russia, it will be also an additional source of income for gas transit. So I believe that, again, as I have mentioned, I don't want to repeat myself, it's a much more sustainable future and a much more sustainable gas sector. I'm a markets guy. Again, I'm not a politician, by the way. So again, I have my MBA. I worked an investment bank in London. So that's something that it's kind of my natural habitat. So I wish that the gas sector in Ukraine will look like a proper market.
Yuri, I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here, and you're really giving, I think, fantastic responses, to a lot of very hard-hitting questions, I would say. But to kind of finish off, first question I want to ask you: can you blame Putin? You've spoken quite critically of him, and I understand the reasons why you've spoken quite critically, both today and also at Chatham House and in other interventions. But then again, if you look at the logic here, we have an oligopolistic, if not monopolistic, sort of situation in terms of the gas supply. I mean, Russia is, of course, not the only supply. We have the Norwegians, and we have Algeria. We've got LNG. You know, LNG tends to go to Asian markets more than to Europe for price reasons, I guess, mostly. But, you know, if you would be a monopolistic or oligopolistic producer of energy with the, you know, infrastructure that you have available, and with the challenges that you yourself are facing, let's say, you know, I remember in the very early 90s, for example, when we were going from Gorbachev to Yeltsin, there was a kind of a view under the Energy Charter Treaty sort of development that we would develop one integrated energy space. You know, I mean, I think this term Lisbon to Vladivostok was actually coined. So I think, you know, there were efforts from Russia to kind of look at things as a whole market. There was also a lot of discussion, I think around about 2001, 2002, of breaking up Gazprom. And you might remember some of the activities at that time. But then again, we saw a consolidation and Gazprom became a vertically integrated sort of company. So I guess my question to you is, if you were to hold that type of advantage, which does generate substantial economic revenue for your country, has some geopolitical weight as well, what other geopolitical tools does Russia have? Facing a relatively hostile, let's say, North Atlantic community in terms of its rhetoric, you know, towards Russia, NATO expansion, a lot of other things. So, you know, could you really blame someone? Do you see another Russian leader, maybe more democratic, maybe less democratic, you know, that would behave differently? So maybe you can comment on that. And then I just want to ask you also about how you see future demand for gas, you know, both Europe as well as within a region where Naftogaz could possibly export and could possibly develop. You know, we are here in Europe with a very green agenda, let's be honest. You know, I mean, you know, Brussels is taking us to kind of a beyond green almost agenda, which is looked at differently. Let's say if you go to the Middle East, you know, UAE, you know, Iraq, Egypt, you know, the hinterlands around Europe, maybe the agenda is not exactly the same. So do you actually see, you know, gas demand as quite buoyant in the future years, and that is something that will stimulate Naftogaz business? So maybe that's my final two questions.
Okay, so first of all, if we should blame Putin, you see, I'm now CEO of Naftogaz. 10 years ago, if you want to get access to the Ukrainian gas transmission system, even if you produce gas, for example, in Ukraine, or if you want to import gas, whatever, you had to come to the CEO of Naftogaz to beg basically for such an access and to bribe a CEO of Naftogaz. And we changed it. So like with these hands, basically, we said, okay, we will change it entirely. So we broke up our own monopoly. And now I don't even know who uses the system. So if you want to import gas again, to produce gas, and you need to use the system, again, I am as the CEO of Naftogaz, I would not even know who basically uses the system. Again, all the terms are transparent, set by the regulator. So we deliberately lost or gave away our monopoly. Why we did it? Because we did it for the benefit of Ukrainian people, for the benefit of Ukraine, for the benefit of the market development. So can I blame people who do not do that? Yes, I can. I have the moral right for that because I did the opposite. Also about some kind of wishes. So in order to negotiate the new transit contract, I first had to negotiate with Putin. So again, my negotiations with Miller were a result of our negotiations with Putin. We had this Normandy meeting in Paris, 4 leaders, Germany, Paris, Ukraine, and Russia. First, there was like discussion of 4 leaders. Then it was like a bilateral discussion between Ukraine and Russia. Again, our 2 presidents. I was a member of the Ukrainian delegation. First, we had discussion about the war situation. And then at the end, we started discussing gas. And our president started this discussion. But then when Putin started discussing details, I had to start to do this discussion because, again, our president, he's the president of Ukraine. He is not the CEO of Naftogaz. While Putin is the CEO of Gazprom, at least it seems often like that, you see. So he was really much into details. And for 20 minutes, I had to discuss some nitty-gritty with Putin directly. So my wish is that I don't need to discuss it with Putin anymore, you see. So my wish is that, again, when politics is taken out of gas sector, it's enough to negotiate just with Miller. It may sound silly, but unfortunately, currently, again, it's not the case. I mean, there are reasons why Putin is in control of the gas supplies through Ukraine and to Ukraine, but all these reasons are political. And all these reasons are basically that Russia is using gas as a weapon against Ukraine, and Putin is in control of such important weapon as basically gas. So that's the point. Demand for gas. It's a tricky question because sometimes when I talk to my kids, we discuss some bright future without high fossil fuels. Yes, and then I look at some, again, forecasts of demand, and I see that actually it's not just demand for natural gas that increases, even demand for oil for the next couple of decades, you see. So maybe only for coal, we will see some decrease, and it will be like 90% decrease. It will be like 10% decrease if you look, for example, at the latest forecast of the International Energy Agency. That's a bit frightening. So I do hope that politicians in this room and in other rooms will change it. Because again, I also personally care about climate change. I like skiing in Europe. So I care about ski resorts in Europe. I don't want basically to live in a region when, because of the climate change, there is no skiing. It's a joke, but again, climate change, it's something that we all should care about. And for this purpose, we should decrease demand for fossil fuels, including natural gas and oil. Again, I hope it will happen faster than at least in this forecast that I'm talking about. But still, natural gas will continue to be an important transition fuel. And that is why we see some very strong demand for gas at the moment in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. For example, for Ukraine to phase out coal. There is a question again, what we'll use as a replacement. So an ideal scenario includes no natural gas, even for so-called gas peakers. But one of the scenarios includes, for example, a need for so-called gas peakers, because the problem is for peak consumption, basically, in Ukraine and in many other countries. So that is why, to be conservative, we should expect increased demand for natural gas for years to come. And that, of course, makes the gas industry strategically important from all the perspectives, including from the climate change perspective.
Yuri Vitrenko, on behalf of Brussels Energy Club, our director, Nadezhda Kokotovich, our advisory board, the many people that joined the meeting in Zoom format here in this room, I would wholeheartedly like to thank you for your very frank, very open, very constructive, and incredibly rich in terms of knowledge, responses to many, many questions. I think, we've had about 20, 30 questions in this discussion. So I think you've done an amazing job. You've enriched us with so much information. So all I can say again is thank you very much for finding time in your schedule. You're the CEO of a very big company which employs more than 60,000 people. A strategically important company which controls very strategic assets. So fantastic to have you here. And we will now finish the meeting. There should be a little reception, but we may have some restrictions on COVID. We'll just check. We'll just check with Gary on that. So Yuri, thank you very much again. It was really fantastic to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for moderating. It was very good. Thank you.